Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. I work at a small tech company and I have a good relationship with my boss, Dave. He's one of those laid-back, kind guys, so when he invited me on a cruise with his family, I didn't think twice. It was going to be a 5-day trip to unplug a bit from the daily routine. Dave was going with his wife, Karen, and his teenage son, Alex. Alex was about 16 years old. He was a good kid, though you know how teenagers are. Quiet and always glued to their phone. The first few days of the cruise were wonderful. The food was delicious. The weather was perfect, and we really enjoyed exploring the different stops. There was an endless list of activities on board: pools, game rooms, shows. Alex usually kept to himself, hanging out around the pool area or meeting other teens his age. Everything seemed perfect. But one night, everything took an unexpected and sinister turn. I remember going to bed around midnight. My cabin was only a few doors down from Dave's family's cabin. I was so exhausted after a day in the sun that I fell asleep right away. The gentle rocking of the ship made it easy to drift off. Around 1:30 a.m., a loud knock on my door jolted me awake, half asleep and confused. I got up unsteadily, not understanding what was going on. When I opened the door, I saw Dave. His face was pale and his eyes were overflowing with panic. "Has Alex come to your room?" he asked in a trembling voice. "What? Why would he be here?" I replied, rubbing my eyes. Dave looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion. "He didn't come back to our room after dinner. We thought maybe he fell asleep here or with one of the other kids." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was very wrong. We got dressed quickly and went to the ship's customer service desk. Karen, Dave's wife, had already called to report him missing, but we wanted to make sure they started a formal search. The staff took it very seriously. It's no small thing for a teenager to disappear on a cruise ship. Within minutes, they made an announcement over the speakers, and a group of employees began checking every corner. The ship was huge, like a floating city, and finding someone there wouldn't be easy. We searched everywhere: the pool deck, the restaurants, the game rooms, the theaters, but there was no sign of Alex. As the hours passed, the panic grew. You could see it in Dave and Karen's faces, and I won't lie, I was scared too. What was supposed to be a relaxing trip had turned into a nightmare. Around 3 in the morning, the ship's staff suggested checking restricted areas, empty rooms and out-of-use sections. It was a remote possibility, but there were no other options left. They split us into groups, each assigned to a different section. I was paired with a burly security guard with a stern expression. We opened room after room. Almost all of them were dark, the beds perfectly made, an unsettling silence broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Until when we were about to give up, we opened a door, and we found him. Alex was on the floor, with his hands tied behind his back with a rope, and his mouth gagged with a dirty cloth. His eyes showed pure terror. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like something out of a horror movie. We rushed to untie him, and the moment we removed the gag, he started crying uncontrollably. He was trembling, pale as a ghost. He told me not to say anything, he blurted out between sobs. He said that if I talked, he would kill my family. "Who?" I asked, my heart pounding 1,000 miles an hour. "Who did this to you?" Alex looked around fearfully, as if he were afraid the man might be behind us. "A man dressed in black," he whispered. "He grabbed me when I was going back to the room. He dragged me here and tied me up." The fear in his eyes left no room for doubt. This wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding. Someone had kidnapped him on purpose, and that person was still on board. We immediately called security, who sealed off the area and began reviewing the surveillance cameras to look for the suspect. Meanwhile, Dave and Karen were devastated, caught between relief and horror. They couldn't believe what had happened to their son. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, after hours reviewing footage and interviewing the staff, The security team identified a suspect, and the most shocking part, it was someone we knew, a coworker from our company. I couldn't believe it. He was a quiet guy from the accounting department. We had had a few drinks with him the night before, and he had seemed completely normal. And yet there he was, caught on camera, lurking around the ship's empty areas, following Alex. When they arrested him, he didn't try to deny anything. He simply lowered his head as they handcuffed him and handed him over to the authorities at the next port. We later found out he held a deep grudge against Dave. He believed that by kidnapping his son, he could scare him and ruin his life. What he didn't anticipate was that the ship's security and cameras would expose him. Months have passed since that cruise, and I still think about that night. About how a place so calm and safe suddenly turned into a scene of fear and danger. And about that quiet man from the accounting department. Someone I never would have imagined capable of something so twisted. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to get on a cruise ship again. The ocean may be vast, but there is no truly safe place when monsters can hide in plain sight. Before moving on to the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to receive the next horror stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 2. I was 13 years old when my family decided to take a trip to Antarctica. It was a huge deal for us, especially because we were going to travel on a massive cruise ship, and I had never been on one before. I remember the excitement I felt, my mind filled with images of icy landscapes and the idea of exploring a ship so big. There was so much to discover that I could barely wait to begin the adventure. During the day, my family and I enjoyed the cruise activities, but when night fell, everything became quieter, calmer, almost unsettling. In the middle of that calm, there was something about the immensity of the ship that made it seem alive, as if it were breathing in the darkness. One night I couldn't sleep. I looked at the clock beside my bed. It was 2 a.m. The ship was completely silent, except for the occasional creaks of metal and the murmur of the water. My parents and my little sister were sleeping deeply in our cabin. The silence was so heavy it felt like it was crushing me. Then I thought it was the perfect time to explore the ship on my own. I didn't think anything bad could happen. After all, what could happen on a cruise? I got up carefully so I wouldn't make noise, slowly opened the cabin door and stepped out. The hallway was dimly lit, and the long corridor stretched in front of me like an endless tunnel. It was strange to walk alone at that hour, but curiosity was stronger than fear. I walked down the corridor, past the empty dining room, and then went up to one of the upper decks. That was when I saw him. A boy, maybe about 17 or 18 years old, was standing near the railing looking out at the dark sea. Later I found out his name was Robert, although at that moment I had no idea who he was. When he noticed me, he turned toward me. For an instant, his stare made me uncomfortable. His eyes were piercing, and there was something in his expression that made me hesitate. "You're up very late," he said in a low voice, friendly on the surface. "What are you doing wandering around at this hour?" I shrugged. I couldn't sleep. I just wanted to explore a little. Robert smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perfect," he said. "I know this ship from top to bottom. I can show you the most interesting places if you want." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt excited at the idea of seeing corners of the ship I still hadn't explored, but another part of me told me something wasn't right. Still, Robert seemed confident, like he knew exactly what he was doing, and I ended up agreeing. We walked together through areas that seemed completely deserted. As we went, Robert started talking about himself. He said he had been on the cruise for weeks, traveling from one place to another. He told me he knew all the ship's secrets, the places no one went, the best spots to hide if you didn't want anyone to find you. At first I thought it was fascinating. Who wouldn't want to know the hidden places on such a huge ship? But his story soon grew darker. He began talking about how he slipped into passengers' cabins when they weren't there, stealing things just for fun. He even laughed as he told me how he had pulled a wallet out of the pocket of a man sleeping by the pool. I felt a chill when I heard him. His smile widened as he talked about the rush he got from doing bad things, like stealing just for the pleasure of it. "It's very easy," he whispered, leaning closer to me. "No one notices. Everyone's on vacation. Nobody pays attention. I could teach you. We could be a team. We'd never get caught." That was the moment I knew I had to get away from him. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweating. This wasn't the adventure I had imagined. I just wanted to explore, not get involved in something so dangerous. I made up an excuse. I told him I was tired and that I had to go back to my cabin. Robert nodded slowly, still wearing that strange smile as if he knew something I didn't. I hurried back, walking quickly but quietly over the hallway carpet. When I closed the door behind me, I felt an enormous sense of relief. I didn't want to think about Robert or the things he had said. I got into bed, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and tried to forget everything. Over the next few days, I avoided going out alone at night. I stayed close to my family and tried not to run into Robert. It wasn't hard. There were hundreds of passengers on board, and I didn't see him during the day. But then something happened that I will never forget. A man was arrested for stealing from a wealthy businessman. He had taken a gold watch, a very valuable piece. I heard several adults talking about the incident. They said the thief had been arrested and would be held on the ship until the next port. My heart stopped when I heard the culprit's name, Robert. If that night I had stayed with him, if I had accepted his offer to be a team, I probably would have ended up wrapped up in something terrible. I couldn't believe how close I came to getting myself into a situation like that. I was lucky, very lucky. The rest of the trip was never the same. The excitement I felt at the beginning faded away, replaced by a constant sense of unease. I stayed with my family and made sure I was never alone again. The cruise was still beautiful, the scenery impressive, but I couldn't get it out of my head that I had almost fallen into something dangerous. I never saw Robert again after his arrest, and honestly, I was glad for that. Story 3. My name is Alina, and I was traveling alone on a cruise to visit my family, who live on a small, very remote island. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, a journey I had been looking forward to for weeks. I imagined the cool ocean breeze, calm days at sea, a much-needed break. But something happened during that trip, something I will never forget. And even today, it still sends a chill through me every time I remember it. It was my second night on board, and I was already starting to feel a little uneasy. The ship was much bigger than I had imagined, with long, narrow hallways that seemed endless. My cabin was on a lower deck, far from the busier areas of the ship. At first, I appreciated how quiet it was. It gave me space to think and relax. However, as the hours passed, the silence became too heavy. The gentle sway of the ship and the constant murmur of the engine were the only sounds keeping me company. The night started normally. I had dinner, took a walk under the stars on the deck, and returned to my cabin to sleep. I wasn't sleepy yet, so I spent some time reading before turning off the light. I don't know how long I slept, but suddenly I woke up. The room was dark, though a faint light from the hallway seeped in around the edges of the door. Everything was silent. For a moment, I thought I had woken up for no reason, until I heard it, a soft knock on the door. It was so faint that I doubted I had really heard it. I sat up in bed, alert. The sound came again, clearer this time. Tap, tap. A shiver ran down my back. Who could be knocking at that hour? I looked at the clock on the nightstand, 3 a.m. I hesitated for a few seconds, but finally I got up. I walked slowly to the door, my heart pounding. I put my hand on the doorknob and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. The hallway was empty and silent, except for the distant creak of the ship moving through the waves. I opened the door just a few inches. only to check. I looked both ways, but I didn't see anyone. I stood there for a few moments, uneasy, trying to convince myself that maybe someone had knocked on the wrong cabin door or was playing a joke. I closed the door, secured it with the latch, and went back to bed, trying to push away the feeling of unease that was washing over me. But sleeping was impossible. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ship, the creaking metal, the distant hum of the engine, the murmur of the sea. I couldn't stop thinking about those knocks. And then something else happened. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, when suddenly I felt like someone was watching me. It was a strange, intense sensation, as if an invisible presence filled the room. My body tensed. Slowly, I turned my head to look around, and I saw it. In the corner of the room, standing there, was a human figure. It looked like a man, tall, wrapped in shadows. I couldn't make out his features well in the dim light, but I could see his eyes. Dark, empty, hollow, and they were looking directly at me. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just watched me in silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. I stood frozen, unable to look away from that being. I gathered every bit of courage I had and, with one sudden movement, jumped out of bed. I didn't care about anything else, only escaping. I ran to the door, clumsy and shaking, struggling with the lock until I managed to open it. I ran out into the hallway and sprinted without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby, where a few crew members were still awake. I stopped there, gasping for air, my hands trembling. When I managed to explain what had happened, they immediately sent security to check my cabin. I went with them, though I stayed a few steps behind, my heart still racing. When they opened the door, the room was empty. There was no one there. The figure, the man, the shadow, had vanished. The guards tried to calm me down, saying it might have been a nightmare or a hallucination caused by exhaustion. But I knew what I had seen. That man was real, or at least he had been. Later that same day, one of the ship's employees approached me. He seemed unsure whether to talk to me or not, but in the end he did. He told me that cabin had a history. Years earlier, a passenger named Hendrik had died there. No one knew for certain how, but since then, many guests had reported strange things. Knocks on the door, shadows at night, or even, like in my case, the appearance of a man in the room. A chill ran through my entire body. He told me that, according to rumors, Hendrik's spirit was still there, haunting the same corner where I had seen him. I couldn't bear the thought of spending another night in that place. I asked to be moved to another cabin immediately. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but I never managed to shake the feeling of being watched. When I finally arrived at the island where my family lives, I felt deep relief. However, even today, every time I close my eyes and remember that night, the empty eyes of that man are still staring at me from the darkness.